Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching Welcome to Plathville. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor, and I like watching reality TV at your request and reacting to it. So let's see if anything of interest comes out of my face as I watch the show.
Please give my younger siblings a better chance in the world.
When your older children say, this is what I found lacking in your approach, or what you did do right or didn't do right, that hurts as a father. I take those things to heart. But now I have an opportunity to connect with Isaac in ways that maybe I didn't with Ethan or Micah.
2 thumbs up to the dad. What he's saying here is wonderful, music to my ears. He is saying that the other kids, Micah and Mariah in particular, are saying that they didn't like the way that they were raised, and so he heard them and even heard their request to change their approach, and he's going to try to change his approach. So let's see how this conversation goes. It's great.
Have you talked to them at all about the change they've gone through?
Not really. Not much, but yeah.
Yeah, I haven't either. You know, in a casual way, you know. Haven't had that conversation with them, but.
This conversation is really awkward for me.
Yeah, they're playing the awkward music to amplify the awkwardness, of course. But so what do we pull away from this conversation? I think it's tempting to look at the dad and say, what's wrong with him? He's so awkward, he's so weird, or he has screwed up until this point. He's trying to make up for it. I'm sure some people are thinking that. But honestly, as a family therapist that worked with a lot of kids, let's see, Isaac is 14. I'm looking at my family tree here. I talked with a lot of 14-year-olds who were forced into therapy, and a lot of the conversations were like this, where, especially in the beginning, where I'm trying to get a conversation going, and they're just like, yeah, You know, they're not being mean. I mean, some of the kids were mean, just flat out abusive to me, but most of them were just scared and not familiar with how to have a sit-down conversation. And particularly boys, because boys are socialized in a different way, and it's not unusual to have a 14-year-old boy who has literally never had a one-on-one conversation of even minor depth. So to expect him to suddenly be able to do that is like asking a 5-year-old to drive a car or something. And so with me in therapy, it would take a long time to get them to trust me, to get them to like me, to get them comfortable, to do things that they wanted to do in therapy. And so, and the conversations, the parents would tell me they would have similar conversations with their kids where they're trying to connect and they're not connecting. And the solution is 2 things. One is obviously you want to start early having open, emotionally centered conversations with your kids early in life so that they get used to it. I mean, all of you parents out there know that there's a difference between a 6-year-old and a 16-year-old. A 6-year-old usually is much more on board with doing what you want to do. If you want to do this activity, if you want to do that activity, then they're generally just obedient, or they want to please you, or they're just up to do anything with you. And they also don't have all the insecurities and self-consciousness that they'll have later in life. But a 16-year-old has a lot of self-consciousness, a lot of insecurities, a lot of worries, and usually an adaptation to those worries as a way of shutting down and pushing people away by saying, you know, the cliche is whatever, you know, that's a affectation of trying to push people away. It's trying to aggravate people. It's also telling people, whatever, you don't mean anything to me, get away. So the trick is you want to start kids early and help them to get comfortable with talking about emotions or having one-on-one conversations. And then by the time they're 16, they're much more used to it. The second thing is if you're already at this point and the kid isn't really into this sort of thing, well, I shouldn't phrase it that way. All kids, all humans are into having connections. And that's something to really remember. A lot of us think of teenagers as like, oh, they don't really want to connect. They do want to connect. They are desperate for connection, particularly boys, because they're often denied that throughout their life. So never, ever think that teenagers are not interested in a relationship. They're just so terrified of what could happen, or terrified of looking stupid, or terrified of being called a woman. If you're a boy, being called a girl is one of the worst insults you can have, given the way that we see gender in our society, which is awful. It's just a sexist thing. It's like you call a boy, oh, you're throwing like a girl. Like, oh, who cares? Lots of girls throw great. What's your point? You know, that kind of thing. Or you talk like a girl. So what? I talk like a girl. Big deal. What's wrong with talking like a girl? Is that a bad thing? Is it bad? It's hard to rewire our brain around gender. But anyway, there's a lot of boys who, in order to retain their masculinity within our culture and maybe within their family, they shut down because they don't want to seem like a girl. It's very much of a boy stereotype to be whatever and to be cool and calm and not talk about your feelings and to be tough, to be a tough guy. And so by the time they get to that stage, it's going to be hard to unravel all that when they're already in the depths of that insecurity. And so what you do is you do activities. You chop down a tree and you talk while you're doing it. One of the things that I found as a therapist early in my career when I actually did this sort of thing was I would take boys for a drive, and I would be driving and they'd be in the car. Sometimes at my agency, they would yell at me because I didn't have insurance for that sort of thing, but it was one of the only ways I could get them to open up. There's something about sitting in a car where you're both facing the same direction, and the whizzing by of the world and the buzz, the white noise of the car and the road or something, that helps people to talk. And I found that it was sometimes a magical thing. I would have literally 6 months of a 14-year-old just not saying anything to me, and then we get in the car and they're just talking and talking and talking. So the point is that the dad could strategize and say, okay, that didn't really work. What's another way I can approach this? What's another way that I can help him to feel comfortable? With some kids, it might be even texting. Well, obviously you can't do that with Isaac here. He doesn't have a phone. But if you have kids, sometimes texting them is easier. They have the time to kind of think about it and respond. Anyway, so let's watch this awkward situation.
Me, I was kind of like, what's going on?
But, you're coming up on it. So is there anything right now that you're thinking, hey, I have a question about this topic?
So that's the wrong angle to take. The dad is asking a very open-ended question while he's on camera, by the way. And I want to revisit the question, can these children truly consent to being on a reality TV show? Because all the children presumably have to consent to being on this show, or at least be asked by the parents. And can they knowingly consent? Do they have the maturity and the world knowledge, particularly these kids, since they don't even watch television, they don't even have the internet? Can they actually say, yes, I know what I'm getting into, I'm old enough to make that choice, I consent to being asked by my dad to talk maybe about sexual topics? I think most of us would agree that Isaac here does not know enough about the world, does not know enough about reality TV shows, does not know enough about what it's like to be cyberbullied or to be canceled or whatever, to be humiliated, to be able to say, yes, I know what I'm signing up for when I consent to be on the show and when I consent to be in this scene. So I just want to bring that up. Anyway, but the dad is asking a very open-ended question. Is there anything you want to talk about? I think the dad is hoping that Isaac will say, well, I've always wanted to talk about sex with you, or I've always wanted to talk about girls, or I've always wanted to talk about what it's like to grow up and, give me your wisdom, Dad. I think that's what the dad is hoping for. It's way too open-ended of a question. You want to ask very easy questions. That's what you want to start with kids, of just like, don't say something like, so do you want to talk about sexuality with me? That's too intense. You might just say something like, so I just want to get to know you a little better. Have you thought about maybe what you want to do after you graduate with your GED and you get your high school equivalency? Do you want to live at home? Do you want to move out? And maybe Isaac's like, well, I don't know. I was thinking about maybe I'd be a construction worker or something. Oh, okay. You kind of start a little bit more easy, or even more easy of just like, so your birthday is coming up. Have you thought about what kind of things you want to get? So that's probably a pretty easy thing for a kid to talk about. So anyway, let's see what Isaac says here.
Nothing? Girls? Any questions? What about the opposite sex?
Oh dear. I wasn't ready for this. I thought we were just chopping down trees.
Now, I will say that the effort is commendable, even though it is against our culture. It is completely a cultural joke these days about dads wanting to talk with their kids about sex and how creepy it is and how invasive it is and how annoying it is and how ridiculous it is. And yet, we are constantly telling our parents to help their kids in a variety of different domains, including sexuality. So which is it? Are parents supposed to completely avoid sex, or are they supposed to talk with their kids about sex? Now, the question is, how do you do it when you talk about it? You don't want to put your kids on the spot. You don't want to freak them out. But there's a lot of things that kids need guidance around, and we cannot depend on their school friends, and Isaac doesn't even have school friends. We cannot depend on the internet. Isaac doesn't have the internet. We can't depend on schools. Isaac doesn't even have a school to raise our kids regarding sexuality. We have to help our children in a variety of different ways. Body image, self-esteem, what constitutes a good relationship, this sort of thing. And sometimes that's talking about sex. We have a society that is extremely sex negative. Almost everything we do about sex is shamed or ridiculed or laughed at or taboo or a sin or something. And we're all walking around as sexual creatures. Most of us, 97% of us are very sexual creatures. And yet we shame any discussion of it. It's blasted all over movies and television shows and advertisements, sexuality. But if a father wants to talk with his son about sexuality, somehow it's disgusting. And the reason why Isaac is uncomfortable is because it's never been talked about before. This family doesn't talk about it prior to this point. I'm guessing the family has a lot of shaming aspects of sexuality. I don't know. Isaac probably at least picks up from siblings and older siblings that sexuality is a taboo topic and that there's something gross about it. Who knows what religious messages that Isaac has been getting. And so there's just a lot there. If the dad was to talk with Isaac about, I don't know, driving cars, well, we don't have stigma around driving cars or the pleasure of riding a bike and taking a jump. Well, we don't have a lot of bike negativity in our society. We have a ton of sex negativity. What's wrong with a father, at least, bringing up the topic? Whether Isaac wants to talk about it is up to him, of course. But I just want to be clear to everyone out there that there's a joke going around over the past 10 or 20 years that, it's that, cliche of the dad sitting down and having that talk with his kids, or any parent sitting down with their kids and talking about sexuality and how disgusting and wrong it is. That's the wrong message, people. We don't want to give the message that parents should be completely avoiding sexuality discussions with their kids. How do you do it? That's a pretty big question there. There's a lot of guidance out there. There's a lot of workbooks and other kinds of things age appropriate for kids. But as it is right now, we have a situation where we have tons of data and tons of wonderful discussions about sexuality that is age appropriate for kids, and the kids don't have access to it. Now, some kids do, and some parents are doing a great job. Some schools are doing a great job. Some churches are doing a great job. But on average, we're doing a terrible job. We are raising kids to believe that their body is disgusting, that their sexuality is disgusting, that their mind and their fantasies are disgusting. This scene, I'm sure, is edited to provoke that response. I'm not sure. I'm guessing of the audience going oh, Dad, roll my eyes at you, talking with your son about sexuality. I don't stand by that message. Again, how do you approach it? That's a very delicate topic, and obviously the dad didn't do well because he just sort of blasted Isaac with it. There's a way to sort of ease into it over the span of a couple of years, but anyway.
In the opposite sex. I know right now you're really not there yet.
No,
Right?
not really. But.
Right? That'll come in maybe a year or two.
So Now, I would also say the dad could do well by getting his own education, because what he just said there was a little silly. He's talking to a 14-year-old boy about, well, maybe one day you'll have sexuality, or maybe one day you'll like girls. One, how do you know he's heterosexual? Two, how do you know he's allosexual? Three, how do you know he's not already massively sexual? He just doesn't show you or talk about it with you. So just because Isaac is being shy about being blasted, again, while on television, an international television show, his dad is asking them this probably for the very first time. And I wonder if this is the dad's way of trying to demonstrate to the audience, like, look, you know, I talk about sexuality I'm open. And when Mariah and Micah criticize me for being a bad parent, look what I'm doing here. I'm doing everything. So I don't understand what's wrong. Maybe this is some kind of passive aggression on that level. But at the very least, the dad definitely could do with getting his education. This assumption that dads know enough about sexuality to be able to talk with their kids about it is a little silly, right? So we all need to shed our sex negativity. We all need to adopt sex positivity. We all need to do what we can about our own shame and our own body dysmorphia, our own ideas about what's right and wrong, and what is disgusting and what is not. And so, anyway, let's continue watching.
When I'm talking about girls with my friends or something, it's not awkward because I don't know, we do it all the time. But when it was with my dad, it was kind of awkward because I don't know, he's never really talked to me about that.
Do you think about that?
Right. So Isaac put it really, really well. And that's basically what I was saying. It was that with his friends, he's used to talking about girls. And with his dad, he's never talked about it before. And so to have this intense conversation is a lot to handle all at once, to be put on the spot like that. And if the dad had progressively talked about this topic over time, then there'd be a lot more back and forth and a lot more comfortability. There are a lot of dads and sons who talk openly about sexuality in a way that both people feel okay with, in a way that helps the younger person to grow and to learn. And I just want to point that out. It's almost never depicted in TV. In fact, is it ever depicted? The one show where I would say it's depicted in some way, and I can't really endorse it entirely. I think I've only seen the first couple episodes, but I think it's a Netflix show called Sex Education. And you have a mom who is very sex positive. I think she's a sex therapist, and she talks with her son about sexuality in very open ways. And in those situations, you could debate the nuances involved in that because she's really out there. But at least it's in the direction of sex positivity and sex openness and non-sex shaming in a family, which we should all strive for, by the way. Now, to introduce it all of a sudden, like say your kids are 15 and 10, and just to say, okay, I'm going to be sex positive, that's not, it's much easier said than done. There usually has to be a transition. But if you're a young family, buy the books, get the workbooks, get the family therapist, the sex therapist to talk with you about how you can raise kids such that, one, they don't shame themselves, and two, that you have at least somewhat of a dialogue about a very important aspect of life for kids. It doesn't mean that kids and parents are talking about the gory details, but it does mean that you can introduce an idea. Like if the son was like, hey, I like this girl, I'd like to talk with my dad about it. Or, hey, I had this sexual thought about a boy or a man. What does that mean? Does that mean I'm a bad person? Does that mean I'm going to hell? We would want parents to be able to say, no, you're not going to hell. Everything's fine. It's totally normal. People have various different thoughts and impulses and behaviors, and everything's fine. As long as it's consensual, you're not hurting anyone, you're a wonderful human being. Please don't shame yourself, and don't listen to society about that, or only listen to certain pockets of society. What a wonderful thing a parent could provide in that moment. Anyway, let's continue watching.
I don't know.
Not really. I just think about more like the Air Force. Of course, I'm interested in girls, but I just don't feel like talking about it with my dad.
So, anytime, I'm just saying, anytime, if you have a question,
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, overall, the dad is doing at least something in the good direction. I think it's a fail because it's awkward and too fast and in front of cameras. But I totally commend the effort. The dad is trying, and maybe this is the first incident of this, and maybe the dad will revisit this with his son, and Isaac will feel more comfortable, and there'll be a more back and forth after a year of this. Hopefully the dad sticks with it. They rarely do on these shows, by the way. Whenever I am like, oh yay, they're in therapy, and I'm celebrating, they never go back for a second session. So oftentimes there's just like this one event and then they never do it again. A lot of things in life are campaigns that you go on, are efforts that you do as a prolonged effort. Therapy, healing, recovery, developing a relationship. These are things that you do over a long span of time, not something you just do one thing about. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of others because we all deserve it. We really, really do.